Welcome back to the next segment in our ongoing digital lecture series for COM 2113, Media Culture and Social Influence. I'm going to jump down to our next participant here and look at some questions from Quenisha, starting with commentary on messages and introduction to communication. Martha Isa Berger. Quenisha writes, in the introduction of messages, Berger states that contemporary communication classes didn't exist 30 years ago. So why is there now a sudden surge or a sudden urge of having a communication class? And I don't know. Is there an urge or a surge? The discipline's been steadily growing for well over this period of time, and I think he was probably by the time that initial draft was written of that, we can add another 5 plus years onto that. But yeah, the communication discipline really emerged in mid 20th century. Okay, and this was a time where it happens to hey, what about it, coincide with that development of mass communication. And I think it would be fair to pause for a second and articulate that just because our major at MacU, it combines several disciplines, right, with like the leading charge of communication, right, communication studies, right. These are the two different ways in which our field is referred to. But not all COM programs, right? COMM, COM programs, have a media studies component, right? That it is common, no pun intended, but it's not prevalent, right? So it's not. Majority probably have other areas. Let's talk about some of the other areas of communication. I believe some of the questions will lead us in that way ultimately, but there could be. There are these subfields or sub-tiers within a communication program that you're likely to see across the country. And some include, one of the most common is interpersonal. You would study interpersonal communication. And that has a nice crossover with a lot of probably the social psychology aspects, right? Many of those that are pursuing a counseling degree have a lot of that crossover exposure. But yeah, interpersonal, intercultural, right? We're continuously seeing, just as I've talked about, this kind of globalization or globalized movement where we're more connected than ever. Our economies are more interactive than ever. Our communication is more interactive than ever. And so intercultural communication is extremely valuable area of emphasis. Understanding more about the differences of codes and contexts, understanding the strengths versus weaknesses of maybe isolationist politics or isolationist approaches to other cultures versus where we should show respect, right? How we code things differently. And we do have an elective that's kind of experimental in the COM major where we kind of combine a couple of terms, intercultural with cybercultural communication. It kind of does some business for us that helps us meet our goals and educational outcomes. But intercultural could be an area. Health COM. We're in an era right now. We're having these public debates about should people be going out in public with wearing masks. Right, wearing masks to help protect the kind of spread of respiratory viruses, and that's all of this. These debates, these engagements, this information sharing and gathering and analysis is health communication to a T, right? Essential. We also have areas of organizational communication. That's a big area in the discipline, organizational communication. And you know what? That often crosses over a lot with the business community, business schools. Many business schools around the country now host their own in-house organizational communication faculty, scholars, teachers, and so on. And they see the value in that. And so communication is one of those fields that really lends itself around. There's even a classical area of rhetoric, right? The study of persuasion, all the available means of persuasion, as we paraphrase from Aristotle. But rhetoric shares some foundations with other areas that also specialize in rhetoric include English. All right, many English departments host rhetoric areas, right? Rhetoric fields, and as do philosophy departments, some philosophy ones. That is a that is an area where we share history. We share history with different fields, and so we saw many of the humanities kind of start to splinter into and grow in their own ways in the mid 20th century, and communication has continued to evolve in that light. There's a nutshell. I don't know if it's surging or urging, right? I'm putting an S on that, but I do think it's important. I do think it's highly valuable, and perhaps our discussions in this course, especially in each of our introductory courses, really sell that point of why does communication matter, and why do we need communication? It's like, I think the most simplest thing we can always say is, if I can't get along with the people in my own house, if I have a hard time communicating with those that know me best, what does that say about how we communicate with the rest of the world, right? All the time. So, valuable. Follow-up question: do you feel like you need a communication class in order to communicate effectively? Of course not. Of course not. Just like, do you need, quote unquote, a college degree for certain types of professional work? No. But it's all circumstantial, right? What is the means, right? What is the end goal that you have in mind? But communication is a powerful tool. If we refine communication down to some of its elements, what do we end up with? The fundamentals of public speaking, and that's often almost everywhere included in the general ed courses, right? So it's one of those, you need basic exposure to this because you will continue to use it, and you should have that exposure if you're aspiring to a certain level of candidacy. Quinish has a final question I want to tackle here. On page 3 of Media and Society, Arthur states that the way he wrote this book is for undergraduates, and if his audience were for PhD candidates, he would have wrote this book differently. I understand the difference between elementary, high school, and college, but I do not understand the difference between college undergraduates and graduate students, besides being in school longer. So, why should we be taught differently? This is a fantastic question. And hopefully the lecture series in week 1 has really been a long form way of kind of demonstrating some of that difference. And here's what Berger means, all right? I pointed out already today that for messages especially, right? This is a pretty thin, you can tackle this book very easily. It's very invitational, right? And when I say invitational, I mean, he's doing stuff all the time, like giving us some kind of, goofy sketches and stuff like that. And by the way, right, these are his hand sketches. Did we pick up on this yet? Berger's kind of giving us a little storyboarded way. He's trying to be playful. He's trying to have a kind of a more open conversation. He's also probably trying to skew away from having to get those pesky permissions for all kinds of other types of professional pictures from elsewhere, and he's just kind of giving us something a different way to chew on things. And that's him having a broader conversation. If I was to thrust upon this class a graduate level textbook, and fewer books are really textbooks, in graduate school they're more like specialized books or whatever, but you come across some textbooks, they would be dramatically thicker, right? The literacy, the level of the kind of the linguistics to them, right? The word, the dexterity of vocabulary would be very alienating to many, especially if you're outside of our discipline, right? And so think about that undergraduate setting as an introduction to becoming gaining an understanding of a field or a discipline or an emphasis area. And just like, let's take some of you all in the class I talked about wanting to become a counselor, right? So that means you're likely moving into a master's program to secure proper credentials. You need to become credentialed to be responsible for someone's psychological well-being, as you should, right? You need that training, you need that extra training. Maybe you need that clinical training. Maybe you need the whatever you're referring to, sort of internship like level of hours, right? You've got to check so many hours of experience before you're qualified in a certain way. And we could think about, once a person identifies their area of emphasis, their specialization, we can think about that specialization, it becomes advanced with each stage. So master's program. All right, my undergraduate degree experience could have finished in 4 years. I had extra funding. I was enjoying where I was at. I was transitioning to kind of work with some collegiate organizations, and so I stayed around a fifth year. And I took more, used that funding, took more communication courses in a different kind of area, and kind of continued my specialization, or broadened it, I guess we could say. And then I had that degree. Well, I could still ask and not understand plenty of questions about communication when I finished that degree, right? I was still lacking some areas. Well, I went and performed professional work for a few years. And got a range of experiences, and really got to kind of build up things, everything from, professional working portfolio to just diverse job descriptions and experience at professional networking, that sort of thing. But, the burden was still there to return to school. And I was kind of, just recharging the batteries to answer a kind of calling to be in higher education, which is where I feel like I'm at my best, and able to invest myself fully. And so, I go back into a master's program, and it was a 2-year program. All right. I think sometimes we're all about speed, right? We're just trying to race to that finish line as fast as possible. And I do understand. Sometimes it's just about the credential for us. For some folks, that's what they need. They need that credential to get to the next portion. And you know what? Bottom line is, it's important to just have the goals and know what you want, right? And then there are other areas where it's the time in school. It's the time invested in a direction and pouring ourselves into a discipline matters, right? Think about med school. You don't race through med school. A college roommate of mine, as sharp as anyone, could retain information like nobody else. Impeccable grades from grade school through college, and wasn't admitted into med school the first year they applied. And what did they tell them in the interview? They said, first of all, let me back up. They finished college a year early, right? And then the medical school said, we just basically like you to take a step back, reapply next year. And we think you're just moving at such a pace. We want you to slow down. We want you to kind of continue to mature. Well, guess what? By the next year, zero problem, zero. Getting in, excel, thrive, very successful physician, right, today. And, sometimes it's about understanding that pace of life, that you can't fast forward to the end. In the coming months, I'll teach a class once again that I haven't visited in a while, and we'll talk about kind of mythology and heroes and the hero's journey, right, in a mythical sense. And it's, you don't jump from the beginning to the end immediately. You've gained nothing, right? It's the journey that equips us, right? That equips us with the necessary tools, with the perseverance, right? With the work ethic, with the knowledge gained through questioning, through experience, and so on, that gets us prepared for that final hurdle, that final encounter, whatever that is. And it's never final, right? But that's what we mean by, back to 2 years. It was a 2-year master's program. Well, guess what? That wasn't the end goal. I could have stopped and started teaching some college stuff then. In fact, I was already teaching in college settings. as a master's student. But my ultimate goal was a terminal degree, right? So shifted immediately into a PhD program and spent, several more years in school, right, and teaching, but really focusing on, building mastery over some areas of emphasis, and you don't get that overnight. And when we talk about building, right, and gaining mastery, this means like entering into these realms, essentially becoming multilinguistic in different languages. Okay, so what I mean by that is, instead of thinking about it like French, Spanish, English, and so on, we're talking about like theoretical languages, right? The language of a field. And this is the perfect tie back to what we've been talking about so far in the week 1 lecture series is language sets that are narrow, hyper narrow in focus, and very specific to having a distinct kind of conversation about, X idea or Y phenomenon or, Z theory or research inquiry, okay? And so, yeah, there is an enormous difference between some of the texts you could gain exposure to at a conference or in those kind of graduate level books versus the kind of very basic information that you're getting access to in an undergraduate setting. But a phenomenal question, because I think it's an important one. I think it's an important one to raise. I think it's an important one we don't answer enough. And it can certainly make us feel even more privileged and valuable about where we're headed in our own degree pursuits. So yeah, thank you for listening, and we'll continue this series and continue to tackle more questions in the next part.